For those of you who just arrived, if you're in the right place, we're going to be having a community meeting about affordable housing tonight. Welcome. And we're going to get a new slide up here in just a moment when it's 6:35, and then hopefully everyone's here. It's just a little housekeeping to start us off. If you're having any problems with your audio or video freezing, disconnect, try to come back. If not, there is a dial-in number for your phone. This meeting has a lot of information and we'd love to answer questions as we go along, but we're going to ask that you put your questions in the chat and we will collect those at the end of the meeting. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, somebody said they can't hear me. So someone asked, Mary Michelle asked if I'm speaking. So can other people hear me? I can't see anyone, so all I can see is the slide. So anyways, I'm going to go on with the housekeeping. I hope everyone can hear me. Okay, other people can hear me. Great. Thank you very much. I really needed that because I didn't want to talk to no one. All right, we are going to answer the questions that we collect at the end and put them into onto our website. You see this this posting where we're going to be putting it. You can go under our website under departments, community planning and building, and then under index, and you'll find all the slides from this presentation and the questions and answers after we're done. So next slide, please. Okay, this is today's agenda. We're going to have an introduction from Christy Caro, our one of our city council members, and then we're going to go through slides to explain the situation. We've worked about 3 months on learning about all of this, the working group, and we're going to present it to you. And then we're going to ask for your participation in answering a couple questions and giving us some direction into how to prioritize the categories we're going to learn about in the first part. So. And then we'll talk about next steps. So next slide, please. So in order to understand the range of needs for affordable housing in Langley, we look at our comprehensive plan. It is sort of our first step in what we do at the city. We always look there, and this is what it reads in our housing element. So we're really going to talk today about what the needs are and the categories of needs. And at the next meeting, we're going to talk about the available tools, resources, and recommend what's appropriate strategies for our community to look at. Next slide, please. So the working group is an ad hoc committee off of our planning advisory board. I want to introduce you to them. So if we can get their faces up here and they can wave, I'd like to introduce myself and Greg. I'm Rhonda Salerno. I'm the chair of the planning advisory board, and Greg Easton is a member also. Are we going to be seeing who they are? Scott, can you put everybody up on the side, all of the working group, please? It's kind of hard just looking at myself and not seeing.
Yeah, they have to start their own videos. So anyway. Okay,
so would you show your faces, working group, please? It'd be great to introduce you with the face. But I think I'll just go ahead and Greg is not only a member of the Planning Advisory Board, but he's a retired land use economist and has been very helpful in this. I think this group has really worked hard, and Greg has put together the slides today, and thank you for that, Greg. We have Rose Hughes, who's a member of the public. Rose has a lot of experience in low-income housing finance and is been really an asset, as well as Bridget, our director of community planning. So that's us, and we, over the course of the next few months, we're going to define the depths of the needs, and this meeting is the first step in hearing from the community. And we're going to look at the existing programs and regulations to help address them and moving forward to more long-term solutions, with hopefully joining together public, private, and many other organizations that we can, as many as we can, to come up with some great solutions. All right, so now we're going to find out who you are. I can't see the working group yet, but hopefully we'll get them up at some point. You'll see it throughout the presentation. What Scott is, oh, I forgot to introduce Scott. Scott is the host of our meeting tonight, and he has brought a lot of experience from his time in Carbondale, California, and where they have done a great job in keeping their town affordable. He is also going to put a poll up right now and asking who you are. Please check as many boxes as you fit into, and take just a minute or so to check that and then submit it so we can look and see who else is here. Oh, my view. Okay, I'm going to give you 20 more seconds to finish the poll, and then we're going to see the results. And I'm going to look at, I don't see Bridget. If you could give us your screen, and Rose. And I should also say that Alex Katand is here. He is helping along with Scott with the technical assistance. So there is our great, my hope was we had somebody from every category in the room, and it looks like we did that. So I'm going to take a screenshot of that so I don't forget. All right, let's go to the next slide. And I want to introduce to you what's happened. So we're going to go off of the PowerPoint, and I'd like to highlight Christy Coral because she is going to introduce everything that we're about here. So if you could stop sharing, and hi, there's some people. Hi, Christy. I couldn't see anyone, so it was very consorted. So take it away, Christy.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. And it's great to see a lot of friends and familiar faces and people that are working on this issue and who've been circling this issue for a long time. So this is awesome. So when I was invited to participate in tonight's meeting, I was hesitant because I thought the last thing I want to do is sit through one more meeting to talk about affordable housing again. And as someone who helped develop a permanently affordable housing community in Langley, and I live in a home that is deed restricted in order to remain permanently affordable, I'm frustrated. And I'm frustrated because we as a community haven't delivered more housing affordability to community members. So that was kind of the reasoning behind my sort of bad attitude. But the problem continues to grow, and I realize that giving up is not an option. So I'm truly grateful to this working group for breathing life into this issue and not letting it go. The issue of housing affordability and housing justice for our community is we have work to do in this area. So a woman named Jen Deerenwater is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. And she wrote that the goal of housing justice is to meet all communities' needs, not merely the needs of the privileged. It means high quality, safe housing for all genders, races, ethnicities, abilities, ages, and more. So just kind of hold that during the presentation. So tonight you're going to be presented with a lot of data. And so as you hear the numbers and you see the graphs, I invite you to stay connected to the story that's living behind all of these statistics, because these numbers paint a clear picture of how housing inequity is actually impacting people we know, ourselves, our friends, our community members, whether they're teachers or restaurant workers, or even people that work for our very own city. The charts and graphs reveal also how the for-profit housing market, when it's just left unchecked, in the end, it produces very little housing that's affordable to low or middle income community members. So under the leadership of our Director of Community Planning, Bridget Reynolds, who's amazing, the city has made a number of significant regulatory changes that open doors and lay out pathways for housing affordability, but there is still so much more work to be done. And tonight we're going to learn a lot about the extent of the affordability housing shortage. And then, as it was stated earlier, a second meeting is going to be planned to really focus on solutions. So the key here is that we need all of us here to engage on this issue. We need you to get involved and stay involved, because the city is not going to solve this issue on its own. The city is only one partner of what needs to become a whole coalition, and that can include philanthropists, local nonprofits, the county, individuals, and perhaps most importantly, those who are impacted by this issue, those people who are in need of housing. Their voices need to be part of the discussions and part of the decision making. So we need to be sure that they have a seat at the table. So in the end, overcoming barriers to equitable housing is largely about upending power dynamics, which means you have to be willing to upset the status quo and take risks and take bold action, be experimental, and try something new. Because there are certain things that we'll all be told, which is that Langley is too small, imposing affordability requirements will chill development. We already have a higher than average number of affordable units, or let the free market run its course and just increase the housing stock, and that'll bring prices down. So there's a lot of these reasons that we hear again and again, and we can't let those stand in our way. So I'm going to leave you with an idea, and it's a way to overcome pessimism, and it's using your imagination to picture that a new way is possible. And it's a woman named Angela Glover Blackwell calls it radical imagination. And she's an African-American attorney and civil rights advocate. So I'll close with her words on radical imagination. Radical imagination fuels the will and strengthens our ability to upend old assumptions. Radical imagination can spark the creation of equitable economies, a new social order, and sweeping public policies that build and sustain a truly inclusive society. Radical imagination is also embedded in the vibrant movement for housing justice. Housing is more than a dwelling or a commodity to be bought and sold on a whim for excessive profit. Housing is a human right and an essential public good to be protected. Thank you. And now we'll segue into the next part of the program.
Okay, thank you so much for that really great introduction, Christy. And yeah, that very broad overview of housing, our problems, and who it's affecting, and the mindset that we really need to take on to tackle it. I'm going to touch on a bit of information that we gathered a couple of years ago. The city did a bit of a survey, a housing survey. It wasn't scientific. We sent it out to through the utility bills, and we received about 140 responses back. We sent it out seeking some, asking questions about housing needs, and also trying to get some responses from folks as to what they thought about some proposed code changes. So here, this was our response when we asked questions about whether or not people had thought that renters were having housing issues, that there were enough options for housing. And as you can see, about 76% of respondents said that, yes, there are not enough housing options for renters. And what you see down at the bottom, the quotes are some of the comments that were returned with the surveys. And then we also asked the same question when it came to, did we have enough housing options for homeowners? And not surprisingly, it was still, a large number, but less than the renters. So we were, 62 of respondents said that there were not enough issues. Granted, 30 odd said that they weren't sure. And, as you might expect, that was July of 2018. And, the world has only gotten more complex and expensive, particularly when it comes to the housing market. We also asked employers if they were having issues, or they knew of employees that were having housing related issues. And so 66% of the employers that responded said that yes, in fact, their employees were having housing issues. And, in part, it has to do with some of the types of employment that we do, that is offered here in Langley, service oriented. And so the seasonal housing, of course, is an issue, because that tends to be when there's higher demand for tourism, short-term rentals. Wage, of course, is another issue. And then just generally, the ability to find affordable housing for somebody who is earning a living, or a $15 minimum an hour job. So what we did this time around is we asked a couple of employers to speak, gathered some information from some of the larger employers here in South Whitby, and interviewed. So the employers that we spoke to represented or employ almost 1,400 employees in the Langley area. And not surprisingly, a large percentage, 75% of them, reported that they have had difficulty in terms of, finding and keeping employees. And the biggest factor was the lack of affordable housing. So now we're going to Rhonda. Or we're sorry, Jen Jurians, who you all know. She is one of our larger employers here as operating owner-operator with her family, the Prima Bistro, and a couple of other food establishments. So is Jen available? So we've got what's really great is.
I think I'm here.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Can hear you, yeah.
Hi.
Tell us your story, Jen.
So am I on there? I don't see myself, but
Yeah,
you see me?
You are.
Okay. Just checking how everything's looking in the room,
You're looking great.
So are you asking me questions, or do you just kind of want me to take it away?
Yeah, just take it away. Just share some of your, some of the things that you shared when you spoke with whether it Rose or Rhonda about
Sure.
the issue. Yeah, that'd be great.
I mean, this
Thanks.
has been an issue. This has been an issue for us for years and years. It's super compounded right now with COVID. I guess I'll start by saying, sort of things that we do to try to attract employees to come and work on the island. We will offer ferry passes. If these are for people that are off island, we'll offer ferry passes. We've had people live with us for short term or longer than we wanted term. We've had a long discussion actually about if we wanted to work with community members to actually hold a master lease for employees and hold the master lease and then have our employees rent back from us. And that was highly discouraged from our attorney to be both the employer and the landlord. And I can see for many reasons why that isn't really a great option. We have right now a real extreme crisis in our staffing. Pretty much, I think that's going across the country, but I think it's on the island. It's really bad because of the housing. Currently, we've got probably it's 4 or 5 that are pretty desperately looking for housing without finding some solution by end of July will have to leave. And those are primarily people that need something in the 1,500 and under range, of which there's nothing right now. I have had 3 very extremely qualified candidates that we hired that couldn't find housing, so didn't move here and didn't want to deal with the commute. We're losing potential employees moving here because of it, and we're going to be losing current employees if they don't find something. You guys still all hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest issues that I see is people that are currently in a rental that they seemingly thought was a longer term rental, who the landlord is now selling. So that's really, I've got a employee who is right now in the middle of it, where she thought this was a long-term rental and has a family and has to be out by July. And she's been here 10 years. She's had to move 7 times, 4 of those for that exact reason of the long-term rental she thought she had. The owner selling it. So those are sort of my, restaurant workers, like apartment type living is apartment or large shared housing, a large house where 5 people could live together and have, really my people need like the $850 rent. That would be what's comfortable for so many of them. Kind of think that's hitting my main points, but it's really a problem. And right now we are, because of COVID, we're at 50% capacity, but we are only able to be open 50% of our normal hours because of staffing. And with that huge part of it being the housing issue, it's a crisis.
Thank you so much, Jen, for sharing that with us. It's not very great to hear that news, and that's why we asked you to come on board, because
I appreciate you letting me speak.
Yeah. And next, we're going to invite Tara Thomas, who works at the Langley United States Post Office right across from City Hall, and she's going to share some of her experiences along the same lines.
Hi there.
Hi.
If you could start your
I'm
video.
sorry you can't, I'm AV challenged. I just put my webcam on today and I couldn't get it to go.
Oh,
So if
okay.
you can hear me.
Okay,
Yeah.
and there is an invitation for you. You might have to check.
It said to go into my settings, and I tell you, sometimes I'm just a little scared to touch anything when I'm on a group
If you
thing.
go
So,
down to the left and where it says stop or start video.
did that, yeah.
Okay, well, go
You're
ahead.
not- So I'm sorry.
That's all right. No worries. We'll just listen to what you have to say. Thanks.
Okay.
All right.
Well, we've got the similar problems that Jennifer was talking about as far as, you know, the housing. We had our latest candidate that hired on came from upstate New York and bought himself a van to live in.
Wow.
And that van is here. You'll see it. It's a big white van. The police have asked us a couple of times if he's okay. But that's what he had to do. He's on a waiting list for an apartment here in town. But we have so much work and not enough employees. Not enough employees that can't find a place to live or aren't able to make a commitment to come to the island for a good paying job. And with COVID, our problem is the amount of the work has tripled. Our parcels have tripled, and I have no staff to cover that. And we've had some temporary. Then the work is so hard they walk out. It's not worth it.
I know I've had a man from Granite Falls deliver things in my driveway recently.
That's Dan. He's a rock star as well. He's in the band.
Comes a long way every day to
He
deliver.
does, because they have Amazon delivers. Amazon delivers everywhere, except on the island. I try to tell customers, because I get a lot of phone calls every day, you do not have Prime if you live on the island. It doesn't exist. So anyway, yeah, the size of the parcels, the amount of work, these employees that I have here, some of them have been here over 20 years, are working 6 days a week, 10 to 14 hours a day. And we have a posting coming online in 2 days for 7 openings. And we've had that ongoing for months now. And we had one candidate, in fact, I think he works for Jennifer, and he didn't want to make the commitment. But he chewed on it for a couple months. So.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. It's getting more depressing as we go along here, but thank
I'm sorry.
everybody that's working so hard to get the mail delivered. We appreciate you so much. So I want to introduce Mary Michelle. Is that correct, Mary?
It's Mitchell.
It's Mitchell. Okay.
Well, it's just spelled awkwardly, so it's all good. You got it right.
All right. Well, Mary Mitchell is with the South Woodby School District, and also serves as the homeless liaison, and can speak to the challenges that staff have experienced, at the school district. So take it away, Mary.
So yeah, my name is Mary Mitchell. I work for the South Woodby School District. I also work for Readiness to Learn. I know one of the issues that the school district has had is hiring teachers, especially when they need a specific certification. We don't always have the right people locally. So trying to hire them from out of district and have them move here has been a real challenge. There was one staff that moved here and looked for 3 months before securing a rental. And so you imagine here's a person who makes a decent wage, who has good community standing, and even they're having a struggle finding a rental when there's other staff helping to look for those. So then you find then you think about families, the families that I work with, who may or may not have excellent credit, or they're trying to get one of those service jobs that pays $15 an hour, and they can't afford the $1,700 rental that is a daylight basement apartment. I had a single mom that I referred that apartment to. I knew that she couldn't afford it, and that apartment went in 1 day. $1,700 for a 1-bedroom daylight basement apartment in Sandy Hook, and it was gone within 1 day. So right now I have 122 school age kids and 151 community-wide kids that are on my, we call it the McKinney-Vento list. It's basically kids that are experiencing unstable housing. That's from 94 households. So 94 households I've tracked since September that are unstably housed. The majority of those families are living doubled up with friends or relatives, but you have to imagine that, yes, they have a house over their, or a roof over their head, but they might, the entire family might be living in one room of a house, or it could also be just really uncomfortable because the kids have to be quiet, or there are so many other struggles that these families have. Over the course of the past 4 years, the people living in trailers and RVs has really skyrocketed. 5 years ago, when I started this job in South Whidbey, I had probably 3 families living in trailers, and right now I have 34 families living in trailers. Yeah, it's a real big issue. Nobody can afford, nobody that I'm working with can afford the rent that's out there. Sunnyview Apartments has been a godsend. The apartments in Manchester Street are really a good source of housing. And then anyway, apartment living is a good source of housing, but it's limited. So there's my story. Thank you. I won't take up any more time.
No, thank you so much, Mary. We really appreciate you coming. And so Bridget, I think you take it away here, or is
Yeah.
it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Mary, Tara, and Jennifer. Yeah, those are really heart-wrenching stories, and I have no doubt that there's many of you who are here in attendance that are personally experiencing some of these hardships too. So just ideally, you know, a healthy housing market or a healthy community has a range, a continuum, a good continuum of housing that is available to people. And on the far right is the housing where folks in the greatest of need. So, and these are where there's ongoing subsidy is required to keep them running, as well as support services. And within these, you know, the market is not going to provide at this end of the continuum. And it's done through a government nonprofit and other philanthropy. We're fortunate in the city of Langley, though, to have the House of Hope. While it's only 4 bedrooms, it has certainly been, you know, really valuable for the people who have been able to live in there and to transition out to some form of housing. As Rose, or no, sorry, it was as Christy mentioned, you know, we do have some non-market, a reasonable number of non-market rentals, given the total number of our units, residential units within the city. But again, those are, you know, providing for a certain demographic, folks that are 55 years and older. So young families, of course, can't take advantage. Market rental, as we've heard, there's various out there, but the numbers are dwindling. Upper Langley, as Christy mentioned, is an intentional community where for affordable home ownership. And then, of course, the bulk of units are on the market home ownership. And, you know, really what we're hoping to do is to increase the numbers of market rental that are available. And again, as we know, we're talking about solutions. That's something we'll be talking on at the next meeting. You may or may not be familiar with Island County Housing Support Center. And this is just to give you a quick snapshot. So they opened their doors in August of 2016. And since then, they have had just over 3,500 in total of individuals that have come through the door. And of those, we've seen, oops, sorry. Of those, you know, a third of the households had children under their care. More than half of the households were at risk to homelessness. That's the bar or the pie chart on the far right. And almost 40% of those folks were literally homeless. So again, sleeping in their cars or in tents or, you know, whatever kind of shelter they might be able to find. And then of course, it doesn't include people who have given up and they have no interest in going to the housing support center because they feel it's such a loss. So yeah, a significant issue all around. So I'm going to hand it off to Greg, who's going to start drilling down to some demographics in terms of the our community and where we are relative to the state and county.
Am I on?
Yep, we can see you, Greg.
You're live.
I'm very good. Well, the human stories we're hearing are very compelling, but we can also supplement that with some demographic and economic comparisons for the community. The most recent source of this kind of data is the American Community Service from the US Census Bureau, and that is from the 5-year period 2015 to 2019. So those numbers are going to be a little bit out of date, but what's useful about them is we can make meaningful comparisons for the city of Langley versus Island County as a whole and the state of Washington. As we see in the first line, the median age for residents of the city of Langley is 64.3 years. That means over half of the population in Langley is 64 years or older. And you can compare that to the 37.7 years for the state of Washington, very dramatic difference, but it's also a dramatic difference between just the rest of the Island County as well. We see a similar phenomenon as we look at the percentage of households with children under 18. Only 16% of the households in Langley have children under 18. And again, that's considerably less than the percentage in Washington State and Island County. And generally, what we're seeing is that Langley has a relatively old population, and that is reflected in demands for housing and also the ability to pay for housing. The other important thing to remember here is that Langley is different than Island County. And as we start to look at some of the threshold measures for affordability that are calculated at the county level, it may not be totally accurate or even appropriate for the city of Langley. Next. So obviously, when you look at affordability, household income is a key factor. And the city of Langley, according to the American Community Survey, median household income is $52,000. Again, half of the households make more than that, half of the households make less. But that is only about 70% of the figure for the state of Washington of 73,000, and still significantly below the number for Island County as well. You can look at some other measures. 11.7% of the families in Langley are living below poverty level, and that compares to only 6.9% for the state as a whole, and considerably less than, considerably greater than that for Island County. And then the final line there, you see 63.7% of the households in Langley are collecting Social Security. Obviously, again, it reflects the older population within the city. But again, we see that the requirements for housing in Langley and the affordability levels are somewhat unique. Next. As we start to look at housing specifically, we can look at the mix of housing units, single family detached versus multifamily duplex and mixed use. There were 762 housing units in Langley in 2020. You can see of those, the darker bar represents single family units, 546, and the redder bar represents multifamily duplex and mixed use, 216 units. So in 2020, 72% of the total units were single family detached. As we look at how that's changed over time, since 2010, there have been 84 new units added within the city of Langley, represents a 12% increase over the previous level. But of those 84 units, 87% were single family detached. Again, a higher percentage than the figure for the total today. And what has happened, the percent of single family units has actually increased over the last 10 years. And so if you look at, in many cases, rental as being a more affordable alternative than ownership or single family detached units, you see that affordability has been affected. And we can look at, again, figures from the American Community Survey for housing. We see that the city of Langley, 43.7% of housing units are renter occupied, 56.3 owner occupied. And you can see that the renter occupied percentage is considerably greater than similar figure for Island County and for the state of Washington as a whole. You can look at median monthly rents in Langley, $1,139. Again, that's a number that's probably a bit out of date given the date for these figures, but again, you can compare that to the other jurisdictions. But I think most significant, you can look at the next line, the percent of households with rent greater than 30% of income. That's a figure that's generally acknowledged to be an affordable level. And so you see 63% of households in Langley are paying more in rent than that 30% threshold. As we look down at owner-occupied units, there's a big difference in housing costs between those units that have a mortgage and those that don't. 42% of the units in Langley that have a mortgage have owners with owner's cost on average is 42.3% versus only 9% for units without a mortgage. Obviously, that shows that people who can afford to own their homes outright have a much less significant burden on their monthly expenses. But finally, important note is the percent of vacant units. 16% on average of units in Langley are vacant, but that doesn't mean there's nobody there. In Langley, virtually all of that is seasonal residents. And so, in fact, those seasonal residents put a greater burden on the housing inventory for those people who live here year round. And last, we can look at another useful affordability for ownership housing. There's something called the Housing Affordability Index, and that number is a measure of the ability of a family with a median income for the area, the ability of them to afford a house that is priced at the median level for the area. And this is a figure that is calculated on a regular basis and reported on a regular basis by the Real Estate Research Center at the University of Washington. And they have, as you look at these numbers, any index number greater than 1 means that the typical family can afford a home with a price greater than the median for the area, those households or those areas with an affordability index of less than 1 or less than 100 have households that can afford a unit with a price less than the median for the area. So for Island County, as of the end of 2020, the Center for Real Estate Research computes a 90.8 home affordability index. So again, that means that the typical household cannot afford the median priced home. And that's a significant gap. But the center also calculates an affordability index for first-time home buyers. And so that's based on buyers that would have a smaller down payment and have some additional mortgage-related expenses. Housing affordability index for first-time buyers is only 66.4. And so you see the significant challenge that a first-time buyer has given the housing market within this area. And so as we start to look at categories of need, it's clear that the first-time home buyer faces a real challenge.
So the ability to own a home not only affects the present, it affects future generations. Let's not forget that 170 years ago, this land was occupied by Snohomish people. Now this land is valued at over $313 million. That would be $628,000 for each Snohomish person who was living in 1989 if they had been allowed to keep their land. So if we're looking right now at intergenerational wealth across 2 generations from 1989 to 2016, we can see that when personal wealth in America is vested in home ownership, government policies can have a big effect on shifting that wealth, like back in 1850, or not, as in 1989 to 2016. We can see how much housing wealth has changed over 2 generations, becoming more concentrated towards the wealthy, as we see that the top 20% gained 5.4% of wealth vested in primary residences and 6.9% wealth in non-primary residences, which of course we have a lot of those in Langley. And we can see that, for example, Black people and Hispanic people have actually made very little gains in terms of the amount of household wealth that they have been able to accumulate during that same time. Next slide, please. So since 1989, Langley has remade itself into a destination location, both for tourism and as a regional service center. So these are some of the average wages by industry for Island County. Try to remember these average wages, and let's see what kind of housing it will buy. So when we're looking right now at the retail income, its average is about 60% of median income. So that $2,650 represents about 60% of the median income, meaning 60% of what half of the people in Island County make. And the tourism accommodations makes 40%. Next slide. So let's look at what that will buy us. For a retail worker making 60% of median income can afford to only buy a studio apartment at $699. Tourist accommodation worker at 40% of median income can't even afford that. But the question is, how many rentals do you see in Langley for $699 even? Let's look at the Langley rental market. Next slide, please. So this is a survey that we did talking to local property management organizations and scanning Drew's lists. So it's very informal, but we found that apartment was $1,000 to $1,500, up to a house $2,000 in rent for a 2-bedroom apartment. So for a house, so if you have a family and you want to rent a house in Langley, you need to make at least 120% of median income. And this is assuming that you also then have to pay utilities on top of it. But what we're seeing is virtually no vacancies. Let's talk about purchasing. Next slide, please. Over the last 3 years, the average sales price increased by 38%. This graph represents the median sales price, meaning half of the houses sold above any given point on these lines. The top line is the Seattle area. The next line down is Langley, and then it's the 98260 area code. And the bottom line, the green line, is Whidbey Island as a whole. So you can see that the pressure on prices in Langley are very high compared to the surrounding areas, and we're tracking pretty closely to the Seattle rise. Next slide, please. Meanwhile, inventory has dropped precipitously. So this is in the 98260 area code, and these lines represent house size. So for a family who needs a 3-bedroom house, or a couple who has 2 people who are working from home during COVID, we've seen the inventory drop from almost 70 in 2011 to under 10, 5 houses listed. Each data point represents 12 months of activity. The data is from April 20th, by the way. Next slide. So we can see that there's a relationship between low market inventory and higher prices. But does building new housing mean that you're building housing that is affordable or attainable to the average Langleyite? Let's see what happened with the new housing developments that have come online since the Great Recession. Next slide, please. This slide represents the 58 single-family dwelling units that have been built in 4 new subdivisions approved in Langley since 2006. Now, you don't see 58 dots because many of the dots overlap each other. Almost all of these units are modestly sized 2-bedroom detached single-family homes. One of them is a 3-bedroom. And you can see that the real estate crash actually hit Langley's economy runs about 2 years behind everybody else. So the real estate crash hit Langley in about 2010. And except for 1 unit, all the units that were sold prior to the crash were way above median sales price. Next slide. So how about affording those homes now? Some of those homes have been resold 1 or more times. And this graph plots, makes certain assumptions about how much it would cost based on the most recent sales price for total housing costs. That includes insurance and most especially property taxes. And you can see how many of those a median income earner can afford. Next slide.
Thanks, Rose and Greg. Again, pretty detailed analysis of what we've got going on in our market. So some of the things we've seen or trying to respond to as a city in terms of land use regulation. So, as has been mentioned, short-term rentals has been something that has is certainly putting pressure on long-term rentals. And so in 2019, council adopted a new code, and one of the more significant elements of it was to limit the total number of whole home short-term rentals to 30 licenses a year, with the hopes then that, that the units would ideally go at least, if not a sort of a long-term lease, it would give some people longer term housing options for a part of a year. We've also amended the zoning code to allow for some more flexibility with accessory dwelling units and detached dwelling units. And we are seeing more of those being constructed since that code change. Recently in March, council adopted a new zoning code for a planned unit development. So that will apply to parcels that are 5 acres or larger. And what is good about this is that as part of that development or any application that comes forward, a development agreement is required. And a required element of that development agreement is an affordable housing component. And so we're expecting an application to come forward for this property here, which is called Coles Valley. And so we'll be working with the applicant on that once it comes through. Another another code change that is in the works and will be going to council in June, the first meeting in June, is this multifamily infill form-based code. And what this will do, if adopted, it would apply to RS 5000. So these orange parcels here closer to downtown, and then these other sort of less bright orange parcels, the RS 7200. But what this code will do is to allow multifamily in these single family zone districts. And so again, you know, while Rose made very clear, it's true that increasing supply doesn't in and of itself increase affordability, but it creates more options, and you know, ideally that it will enable some more units for people to be able to live in, buy or rent. We've also got the infrastructure project, which you may know is a $7 million project, which will result in water, sewer, and stormwater infrastructure improvements. And that will certainly have some impact on this neighborhood, Furman Decker, by extending sewer out that way. But there's also some other constraints that we have. You know, we've got the municipality, the city is 1 square mile. And certainly people think, well, why not just annex, you know, expand the city boundary? The thing with that you have to remember though is, you know, by utilizing the infrastructure that currently exists within the city, that's far more efficient and sustainable use of that infrastructure rather than extending, you know, sewer and water. While the initial costs may be borne by the developer, the long-term costs of operation and maintenance is borne by the rest of the taxpayer. So really, we want to be increasing our infill to the greatest extent that we can. That fits, you know, that's context sensitive to Langley, to increase some housing options. We have a single source aquifer, and so which everybody on Whidbey Island is drawing upon, whether it's a community water system or a well on a rural property. And then we also have some limitations that are brought down from the state, from Department of Ecology, in terms of our water rights to this aquifer. And then also there's another threshold, of course, with our wastewater treatment capacity. We're currently at about 62% capacity. And then when we hit the 85% mark, that's when we need to be starting to do some real evaluation of and looking at the future design for what we're going to be able to do in the future, what improvements need to be made at the wastewater treatment plant. So as previously mentioned, we've got our comprehensive plan. This is the vision that was identified back, I think it really goes back to the mid-90s in terms of what we, you know, how we want Langley to be in the future. Of course, the future is now. You know, we want to be, again, continuing to be the service center for South Whidbey. We want to be attracting visitors and retirees, businesses, and new families. And then we have the goals in order to achieve those. Well, these goals, you know, if what we're trying to do is to, we've got employment opportunities that are balanced with a range of diverse housing opportunities. And again, we're providing affordable housing for a diversity of residents within the city. Well, as we've heard, I think, you know, pretty well articulated over the last hour or so, we're really missing the mark. And so how are we gonna continue to work towards this, achieving these goals and this vision? So I'm going to hand it over to Greg.
So as we look to what the city can do in the future to address affordability issues, I think it's helpful to break the need into various categories. And by doing that, you can prioritize the needs, and then you can also match tools with those needs. One helpful way of looking at it is just looking at different household types. And as you think about how individuals and households go over their life cycle, you can look at how their housing needs change and how their ability to pay for housing change. And so one simple way to break this into categories is just to look at maybe the following categories. And we welcome you to amplify this or amend it as you see fit, but look at housing needs of young employed single people. They may be very different from the needs of young employed couples, certainly in terms of the size of the household. At some point when households get ready to buy a home, what are their needs? And depending on the size of that household, or maybe a small household or a larger one. Move-up buyers have different financial capacity, but again, they may have different particular needs. But finally, with an older population, you may find older householders, one or two person households that are on fixed income, and their particular needs are can be very different. So just invite you to think of the housing spectrum as maybe comprising these particular categories of need.
Okay, now this part of the program we're going to break into breakout rooms, probably only about 10 minutes, and it's going to be randomly done, so you don't know who's going to be in your group. But the two questions we really want to answer is to quickly share your personal experiences or experience of friends or family members with the difficulty, but more importantly, what we need to get back from you to go forward is what we want to prioritize as a community when addressing these issues. Obviously, they're very complicated and complex, and we really have a lot of work to do in various, and we have a lot of people today here that have great ideas, and I hope they will come to the next meeting. It's pretty important that we hear from you all, but this meeting is really concentrating on what we want to prioritize. So those are the questions. When you get into your breakout rooms, will you please choose a repertoire, someone to write what some of the highlights are, and when we come back for just a few minutes, we'll take some of the highlights of that. So I'm going to go ahead and ask Scott to put us into breakout rooms. Bye-bye, everyone. Okay, so we have a few minutes. If there's some things that stand out in your groups and you have someone that would like to raise their hand, there's a box down below where it says reactions. And if you click on that box, you can raise your hand and we can skim and see if there's any hands raised. Anybody want to report back anything about priorities or anything special that came up for you? Okay, looks like Vicky. Let me, can you put Vicky on, Scott?
Vicky, you have to start your own video, but you are,
Hi, Vicky.
Hi, yeah. One of the ideas I heard in my group that I'm keying off of, it's not like just reporting on the idea, is in what ways can we incentivize owners to rent space in their homes? And I know that from reading that one of the reluctances is safety, that people feel that it's not going to be safe to somebody in their home. And so if that could be worked on, like in what way can the city or some aspect of our community help people feel safe and actually benefiting to have somebody occupy a guest room or a separate wing or something like that. That's it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Inga? You put-
This is less, and I'm sorry, I can't turn the video on right now, but this is less what came up. It's an unanswered question for me. If we have such an imbalance in terms of age, in terms of demographic of Langley, if we build additional housing, does it not just fill up with the same demographic? And is there anything that can specify housing to a specific group of people? I know you can do over 55 and over 65, but can you do worker housing that's restricted to people that do job functions that are necessary?
Maybe we can get Bridget to talk about that if she has any feelings on that. Do you have anything to say about that, Bridget?
I don't know if that's possible. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, Greg.
Our group, small group, but I think the major sentiment that came out of our group is that most of us have owned our homes in Langley for 15 to 30 years, and we're all grateful that we're able to purchase when we did, because it would be a lot more expensive if we were to try to do it today.
I don't see any more hands raised. Bridget, did you have your hand raised?
Yeah, in our group, there was an interesting idea, this notion of like a conservation easement on a dwelling unit, on your personal dwelling unit. And so that as the homeowner, you're putting this deed restriction on your house, likely in partnership with, a housing society, nonprofit. So that would establish a price that, over the duration that you are living there, and when you go to sell it, that you're putting a cap on how much the value of the home would be over the duration that you own it. And the example came sort of looking at Upper Langley, and that's what they do. They're deed restricted to a certain value, and the comment was made that you're not building wealth that you do on the open market, but you're building equity while you're living there, because once you paid off your mortgage, you're certainly building that equity that if you choose to move on, you can take that and move away.
Mm-hmm. Rose? Oh, just a minute, Scott.
My room definitely seemed to stress as a priority that we get housing for people who are currently in substandard housing, and especially younger families that are in substandard housing, and get them into housing that meets health codes, and that people are willing to live in very small units as long as they're a healthy environment. And the question is, then what? But absolutely, priority is to get young families into housing, out of substandard housing and into stable housing.
Okay. Scott. Don't see you anymore. Scott, you had raised your hands. I can go for my group while we're waiting for Scott. Rose, you have your hand up still. Do you want to speak again? Okay, I lost Scott. There you are, Scott. Can you unmute yourself? There you go.
I should be unmuted. Yeah. So so addressing the question of can housing be made for specific age groups? Not really, but or demographics. But in Colorado, where I was, we did have an interesting situation where the school district had a large chunk of land with an old elementary school, similar to the old Langley High School. And they had a desperate need for housing for their teachers. And we also had a housing authority that was trying to find, different rentals and for sale. And so we did intergovernmental agreements and public private partnerships to create over 100 units of affordable housing. And because the school district was a partner, they
Can you find him?
first
Maybe
did.
he's out in the backyard.
Yeah. So anyway, it is possible, and I think there's, if everyone can come this fall, there's going to be a lot of exciting things that we're going to have to share with you.
And in our group, the priority was definitely for rentals, for apartment living, for people who work in the city. It was one of our priorities. And then the choices, having choices for home ownership and rentals that can help, that people with various incomes can afford. So I don't see any more hands up. So we've gone on for a long time. It's been a lot of information. We appreciate all of you hanging in there and coming and educating yourselves. And this will be recorded and available for the rest of our city government that has not come to this meeting, because I think it's really important to have this background when we go forth with making decisions. So thank you all. And Bridget is going to see us out with the last slide, so you know where you can send your notes, if those of you who were the reporters in your group.
Are you seeing the slide?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. I think it went from, okay. So yeah, we don't have a date yet established for our next meeting in the fall, but we will be, the focus of it is really going to be trying to look at some of the various tools and strategies and solutions that are out there, and try to drill down and look at what is, potentially feasible here in Langley, recognizing that, this isn't just a Langley issue. It is a South Whidbey. It is a Whidbey Island or Island County issue. And so we need to be looking at sort of all the levels of both at the county level, at the city level, and port district, school district, and so on, recognizing that, the complexity of these solutions are going to require some partnerships and yeah, definitely a lot of hard work. And there's not going to be one silver bullet. But we certainly appreciate you all attending today and giving us your Tuesday evening. And as has been mentioned, please, we will be taking the comments, the chat, and trying to provide answers to many of the questions that were raised in the chat. And we'll be posting those on the website. And we will also be sending the information out to you so that you have it available, and making sure that you have the link to the city website where it's going to be located. If you want to share it with others, please do. And again, if you are struggling with housing issues, or of somebody who is, please contact the Housing Support Center. They're in Coupeville, and we've got the phone number up there, as well as you can always drop in and visit them there. So thank you all again, much appreciated. And thanks very much for the folks, Scott and Rhonda and Rose and Greg, and also Alex that came together and worked together on this presentation, because it was all down to them, most definitely. So thank you all. Good night.